All right. All right. All right. We are live. So, in a minute here, we're going to be getting into the podcast. And today, we're going to be hitting a little bit of mindset stuff like I usually like to do on Mondays. We're going to be talking about where you were 5 years ago. Now, basically, the reason that this one came up, why I wanted to do this episode, was I had a conversation with a new athlete of mine who was saying that he was feeling stuck. He felt like he wasn't really making progress. He felt like, day to day, things were a bit of a grind. So I had him think back to where he was 5 years ago and then where he's at now, just to really reinforce the fact that, every day might not feel like you're making a lot of progress. But if you combine those days, weeks, months, years, it amounts for massive change. So we're going to get into the show very quickly here. Before we do, the goal of the show, as always, is to help athletes achieve their dream careers in sport. Our goal is to help athletes reach their true potential, help them in all areas of life, not just training itself. So today we're getting into a little bit of mindset stuff, and we're going to get into the show now in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the #1 show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we're getting into a little bit of mindset stuff. We're asking a very important question: where were you 5 years ago? Now, the reason, like I said before the broadcast started, the reason that I'm bringing this one to you guys is because I had a conversation with a new athlete of mine, guy that's been with me a little bit under a month, and we were talking about exactly that, where he was 5 years ago. And the reason we were talking about that was he mentioned that he was feeling kind of stuck. He was feeling like he just wasn't making a lot of progress day to day, and it was discouraging. So I know that a lot of athletes feel this, and I know that here and there I feel this too. And so I thought, first, how can I help him? And second, how can I help more people through that conversation with him? Now, the first thing I had him do is I had him think back to where he was 5 years ago. So, I asked him, where are you now? And he listed out kind of where he's at in his career, what he's been doing. And then I asked him, where were you 5 years ago? And he just laughed and he said, man, 5 years ago, I hadn't even started training. I was too scared to go to a gym. Like I was doing nothing 5 years ago compared to where I'm at now. And the reason that reinforced it so hard is because you've just got to think about it like that, right? If you feel like day to day, you're not doing enough, or you're not far enough, or you're not making progress, look at it exactly that way. Ask yourself, where were you 5 years ago? And I know when I asked him that question, I also went into a little bit of detail on myself. So 5 years ago, I had been in Calgary for a little under a year. I was stuck I had just moved out of the horrible hole in the ground apartment that I was living in. I was still relying on my parents' help financially because I wasn't fully supporting myself. I was honestly a shell of a human being. I was scared day to day, anxious, nervous all the time. I was still getting over my last relationship, which, I thought was going to be it and all for me when it came to relationships. But the world played a cruel joke on me, to say the least, which ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me. And not even in a way of I don't hold anything against her. I wish her nothing but the best, but we just weren't a good fit, and I wasn't mature enough to see it at the time. And so I was still getting over that. I was still, just nervous when it came to relationships and all that kind of stuff. And it's then I look at where I'm at now, and I own my own gym. I've worked with athletes in 10 different countries around the world. I don't have a huge following on social media or anything, but I have almost 300 episodes out of my podcast. I have athletes DMing me on a weekly basis talking about how even just consuming the stuff that I put out on social media is helping them out a lot. The difference in that 5 years is absolutely fucking unbelievable. But if you get stuck in the day to day, if I look at where I was yesterday and where I am today, it's not very different. But if I look at where I was 5 years ago compared to now, a year ago compared to now, 10 years ago compared to now, it's drastically different. So when you're feeling that feeling of, not making enough progress, you're feeling that feeling that, day to day you feel a little bit stuck. Yeah, you need to continue to try to progress day to day, month to month, week, year to year. But you need to also understand that if you continue forwards, that is where those massive changes come from. Like, again, 5 years ago, I would have thought it was impossible for me to run my own gym. And 5 years later, I have my own gym, it's thriving, and I have an online business with over 40 clients. 5 years ago, I was convinced that relationships were, the enemy, and I was just destined to be single for my whole life because I was getting over a bad breakup and a bad relationship. And 5 years later, I'm in the best relationship of my life. But again, none of that happens overnight. None of that changes like that. That changes through the day-to-day experience. That changes through the day-to-day work. And that's what so many of us forget. If you feel like you don't make progress for a week, for a month, for a year, as you continue to work, you're getting stuck in the day-to-day. You're getting stuck in that feeling of, not getting far enough this week, when you don't realize that when you look back at 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, you were an entirely different person than who you are now. So if you're dealing with that feeling of, just feeling stuck, feeling like you're not progressing, the first thing I want you to do is ask yourself why you're feeling that. So ask yourself, what areas you're feeling stuck in. Because I know for myself, a lot of the time, if I run into that feeling, I feel like I'm not growing my business as much as I should be. It's not progressing at the rate that I want it to. And so, yes, I'm looking at, the day-to-day things that I can do to continue to grow the business. I'm looking at those tasks every day and wondering, what little thing can I switch or change or improve to continue to make progress. But I also look back at 2 years ago. And I look back at 2 years ago and I say, man, where I'm at now compared to getting shut down and being forced out of the gyms and having half my clients leave when COVID shut the world down, I'm pretty fucking far along. But I want to be able to look back at now, 2 years from now, and say the same thing, right? So the one thing that you need to do right away is, yes, look at what you're doing day to day and figure out what you can improve. But the next step is to look back and see where you're at compared to where you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and look at the progress that you've made. And the reason that's so important, because even where I'm at now, I'm not satisfied. I want more than what I'm doing right now. But the reason it's so important to look back and to be proud of the changes you've made, be proud of the progress you've made, is because otherwise the day-to-day is hell. Grinding it out for every single day for the sake of it is hell. But when you look at the progress that you've actually been able to make, that reignites the fire, and that reinforces the very, very important point that I'm going to get into next, which is, as you continue to move forward each and every day, you need to understand that even if it's 1%, that one little step coming forward, your ability to take a step forward today and take a step forward tomorrow and take a step forward the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day is what creates the ability to look back at 5 years ago and be an entirely different person. Because there was no one day in the last 5 years going from, barely making it through the month, being an anxious wreck of a human being, to being confident in myself, owning a gym, working with athletes in 10 different countries around the world, the other things that I'm doing now. There was no one day in that time where I feel like I made masses of progress, other than maybe signing my first international client, the actual day that we signed the lease to open the gym, the day that the gym actually opened, those big milestone days. But other than that, there's no day that just like jumps off the page as like, holy shit, that day I made a ton of progress. But the fact is, I woke up every single day and I pushed forward anyway. And because I woke up every single day and pushed forward anyway, now I can look back and I can see the massive changes that I was able to make. And that's what so many people are missing. They go for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then they say, well, I haven't made that much progress, so I'm done. I'm going to quit. But what you don't realize is that next level could literally be the next day. That next milestone moment could literally be the next day. But because you weren't willing to stick it out, you don't get that milestone. Like, one of my favorite ways to look at this one is, have you ever seen, there's that picture of, it's people, I believe they're digging underground, and they're far, far, far underground. And then like the next slide, the guy's basically like, he's quitting on the dig, and the gold is like 2 inches below where he finished digging. And it's just what you guys do with your careers as well. You start working, you start training, you start doing all the right things. And then 2 inches away from where you're going to strike gold, where you're going to change your life, where everything's going to start looking up, you say, man, this is too hard, gone too long. That's it. I'm done. And it's like you miss out on the absolute best things in your life because you stop moving forward. So what I want you guys to really think of, really get back to when it comes from this episode, is think back to where you were 5 years ago. Think back to what you were doing 5 years in the past. And then look at what you're doing today. Even if you're not satisfied with where you are, even if you're not happy with where you are you further along in your life than you were 5 years ago? Now, what can you do in the next 5 years to be happier with where you're at than where you're at now? But when you have that long-term vision of what you want to do in the next 5 years to be happy with where you're at compared to where you're at now, that's when you need to start looking at the day-to-day. You need to start understanding that even if for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year, you don't feel like you're making any kind of great progress, understand that you need to do it anyway. You need to show up anyway. You need to continue to push forward anyway, because that's the only way that you're actually going to be able to look back and see the huge changes. One of my favorite examples of this as well, even just from a business standpoint, is social media. I post on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts every single day, twice a day. And most days, literally nothing happens. Like, I'll get, 10, 15 likes on a picture or something, or a video or something like that. I don't have any kind of huge growth or anything like that. But then every so often, I have people reach out to me and want to work with me because they enjoy the content that I post on social media. And now the return on that day-to-day task of posting every single day, being on there twice a day, all of that, has the return start to come through. And this is the way you guys need to look at your training. This is the way you guys need to look at your nutrition. This is the way you guys need to look at everything. Any one good meal isn't going to be the difference between, you being in the shape you want to be in and you being, prepared to go step in a ring or a cage. But every good meal over the course of the 12 weeks of training camp, 10 weeks of training camp, whatever it is what is going to put you on weight, is what is going to get you in shape, is what is going to fuel you properly to step into the ring or step into the cage at your absolute best. But every time you sacrifice one of those meals, you're just taking one step back instead of one step forward. So instead of looking at it as, oh yeah, I'm just going to stray off the plan today because, one time isn't any big deal, start understanding that every time you do that, you're moving further away from the goal you have set for yourself. Every time you say, it's not that big a deal, I'm going to skip training today, I'm just not feeling it, whatever it is, that's one step back. That's one step where you're saying, oh, the goal's not that important, I'm just going to let it go. And because, again, coming back to the whole point of this episode, where were you 5 years ago? Every single one of those days where you wake up and you don't feel like it and you do it anyway, is a step towards the massive change that you can see from the last 5 years or the last 10 years or the last 15 years, wherever you're at in your life, wherever you're at in your career. Every single day matters. And it's how you show up. It's how you approach the day. It's how you spend your time each and every day that is going to create the change you get to see every 5 years. The change from today to tomorrow is going to be nothing, if not nothing, very close to it. But if the change is just 1% each and every day, over the next 5 years, you're going to see massive, massive amounts of change. And that is what you should be striving for. So anyways, that is it. That is all. I appreciate you all for tuning in. As always, if you got some value from the show, make sure to go subscribe to the podcast, the YouTube channel, all the other good stuff, and share the show with a friend, with a teammate, with someone who's going to benefit from this message. As always, I appreciate you all for tuning in. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll catch you on the next episode.